Frick had both saintly and evil attributes. While labeled a robber baron, he believed in playing fair to amass his millions. Contemporaries admire Frick for his ethical and straightforward business dealings. Enemies and friends preferred to deal with Frick because he was trustworthy. Frick was extremely generous, however, and saw giving as personal, not a requirement of a capitalist. Frick saw it as a basic right to accumulate wealth, yet on a percentage basis, few people gave as much to charity as Frick did. In respect, he was a pure capitalist, seeing capitalism as a freedom, a right, and the preferred economic system of the democratic societies. Frick's excesses represent not so much evil as the blindness that comes with success. Frick was a human, not evil, and his life demonstrates many shortcomings found in all of us. These opening selections come from the book that I just finished reading. It's called Henry Clay Frick, The Life of a Perfect Capitalist, and it was written by Quentin R. Scarbeck Jr. 2 episodes ago, we had covered the autobiography of Andrew Carnegie, and he only mentioned Frick a few times in his book. But it's clear that without H.C. Frick Coke Company and Henry Clay Frick, he never would have become the world's largest producer of steel and perhaps might have been lesser known in the eyes of history. And I just love how books are the gateway to other books, because the autobiography of Andrew Carnegie, that led us to the book Meet You in Hell by Les Standiford. In that book, it looks at the love-hate business relationship between Carnegie and Henry Clay Frick, and we covered that on the last episode. But it doesn't go that deep into the biographical account of Frick. So today we go through another gateway and we dive deeper into Frick's life and pull out the lessons that we can learn that'll help us the most in our businesses. This book does an excellent job at clearly explaining the historical and the political forces that were in play and led to the many, many choices that Frick makes throughout his business life and also in his personal life. Quentin, he has a background working in the modern day steel mills as a manager, and he blends this into his writing. It adds a deeper credibility, and he takes great care to explain the technical aspects that can be easily understood for you and I. In fact, I enjoyed his writing so much that I recently ordered the biography of H.J. Heinz, and I'm looking forward to talking to you on the next episode about that particular book. I've already started it, and it's quite fascinating. If you're new here to the show, I just wanted to take a moment and say welcome, and if you're returning, welcome back. I appreciate your time today to listen to the episode. I hope you will find some value in what we're talking about today with Henry Clay Frick. And if you'd like to pick up a copy of this book, there is a link in the show notes. If you use the link, you'll be helping to support children's literacy, as I donate all affiliate revenues earned from that Amazon link to help support that cause. This is something that Frick also believed in. He founded the Pittsburgh Educational Fund early on in his career to help improve grade school education. Later in life, in 1915, when the Bank of Pittsburgh Savings went bankrupt, Frick had learned that about 40,000 school children lost their dime savings account. Almost immediately, he wires about $170,000 to repay the children in time for Christmas. He was very generous with his giving, along with his morality in doing the right thing, and this goes all the way back to his childhood. Whereas a student in a one-room schoolhouse, he's raised on the McGuffey Readers, which were one of the first textbooks that they used in the classrooms at the time. McGuffey Readers began early to reinforce individual property rights and the need to give to the poor the importance of saving, Christian principles, and appreciation for the classics, and American exceptionalism. Stories of Napoleon were common in the readers. The reader prompted fundamental rights that led to America embracing capitalism, but placed charity far ahead of making money. This McGuffey reader format in the classroom, it makes such a huge impact on Henry Ford as he's growing up that in 1932 he actually purchases the tiny log cabin where William Holmes McGuffey was born. He has it moved to Greenfield Village in Dearborn, Michigan, and in 1934, after it's been restored, he's going to host a 2-hour televised tribute to McGuffey on NBC so that he could honor his principles and the impact that McGuffey had on millions of children. Now let's go back to Frick here. He's in school. He's often behind. He misses a lot of days due to sickness. As a child, he had contracted scarlet fever, which at the time was often a death sentence. He would survive, but it has lifelong consequences that strike him many times with rheumatic fever in this inflammatory rheumatism, and this keeps him down for weeks, even months at a time in some cases. And it's also said in the book that this weakened his heart. But when he was in school, thanks to that McGuffey reader, Frick, he starts to develop an early love of reading, and he also excels in math. These are the key educational cornerstones that he builds his business on top of, along with the admiration of his grandfather, Abraham Overholt, who had established the old Overholt distillery starting around 1810 or so. It became clear that he could make 10 times the money selling grain processed into whiskey than selling it as grain. In 1812, he purchased an old Scottish-Irish 150-acre farm with a small log distillery for $7,500. And whiskey making had become quite common in this area of Pennsylvania. Many households, they could make a lot more money selling whiskey versus the grain, as we had just heard. So Abe, he grows his brand into one of the largest, and in doing so, he uses vertical integration to help him accomplish this. He's taking water from the nearby Jacobs Creek, he's growing his own grains, he's turning it into whiskey, and then he's feeding the excess mash to more than 2,000 pigs on his farm, and then those pigs would get shipped out all over the country. Abe, he goes even further. He builds an entire town around this distillery, and this includes copper and blacksmith shops, along with a brick mill. And in his house, he had built a substantial 3-story brick home. In all of this, it becomes the training ground for a young Henry Clay Frick. He is observing everything as a boy that's going on here. He's taking all of this in. Now, he's born at home December 19th, 1849, to John Frick and Elizabeth Overholt. And they had started out life on kind of a rocky path. His father was a failed painter, and this wasn't like a house painter. This was a painter of pictures. He was a failed artist, if you will. And he switched over to farming, and he wasn't very good at that either, and he almost gave up on that. But he does make a little bit for the family to survive on. But in general, he's seen as the black sheep of the family. He doesn't have a lot of ambition. So his mother, Elizabeth, she arranges for the family to live in a small spring house that was located behind the Overholt mansion. And this wasn't just like right out back. This was like way, way, way out back. But regardless of that, this still put Henry Clay Frick in that environment, that rich environment where he's learning. As a boy, Henry Clay is going to be known as Clay to most people, and he's going to be considered frail and delicate because he's always sick. In school, he wants to compete in sports, but he has a really difficult time. His lack of physical strength restricted him from playing in popular ball games, but Henry still practiced soccer. Henry never let the cruelty of the playground defeat him, but only made him more determined to succeed. Limited by his physical ability, Henry Clay developed his mental skills to advance. Clay became an excellent chess player and enjoyed the game throughout his life. It's these mental skills that he develops early in the game of life that's going to serve him very, very well. And I believe this allows Henry Clay to start noticing that his father, he doesn't really have a firm grasp on working hard, and he really lacks ambition. Naturally, he turns his focus to his grandfather, Abe. The person who most influenced him was his grandfather, Abraham Overholt. Early family biographers believe that Henry was ashamed of his father's low ambition, but his attitude was more admiration of his grandfather than a resentment of his father. And I think that was what Frick had learned in those early McGuffey readers. He could see in real life that his grandfather matches up to what he's learning about in those books. He really sees a great man. He sees a man practicing capitalism. He sees a man that's developing vertical integration. But getting close to his grandfather, it takes a lot of work on Clay's part. Overholt was a stern and difficult man to get close to, and he had many children and grandchildren competing for his attention. And I believe in the book, it was mentioned he had something like 48 grandchildren. So, how would Frick do this? Well, I'm sure you've heard that term, dress for the part that you want in life. This is what Frick does early on. It was said that 14-year-old Clay was determined not to dress like a poor farmer, but in the style of his well-dressed grandfather. In this drive, it's going to lead him to his very first job that he ever has, working for one of his uncles. He started as a clerk in 1863 at his uncle Christian Overholt's West Overton store to earn money for clothes. Henry's wages at the store were $3 a week, which was typical for such a job held by a young boy. Not long after starting there, he changes jobs for another Overholt uncle, and this time he's making $6 a week. With a dress style like his grandfather, he starts to catch his eye. And in the evenings, like how he enhances his outward appearance, he builds this mental muscle by taking classes in bookkeeping. Bookkeeping opened the world of cost accounting to Henry, which would be his strength throughout his career. Henry was particularly fond of the fancy and artistic choreography of the accountants of the period. He saw the accounting book as the very symbol of capitalism. So much like John D. Rockefeller, he can see where all the cash is flowing. He can see the good, he can see the bad. The ledger books speak to him. They paint a picture in his mind of where everything is going. Along with this, Henry Clay, he starts to read more books, like The Life of Napoleon Bonaparte. That McGuffey reader really was an internal fuel that was forcing Frick to explore the world deeper. In this inner drive, it becomes well known to his grandfather, who helps him with a job as a bookkeeper at one of his relatives' distilleries for $25 a month. This was a big step up for him. And for the first time, you and I, we get to learn about that deep inner drive that's going to propel Henry Clay for the next 10 years. Henry worked hard and improved his skills at bookkeeping, but he still dreamed of bigger things. Family legend had it that he had a goal to make $1 million as a young man. And this really was a big goal. He's 19, but other men in the area in Pittsburgh, they had reached this goal, so he knew it was certainly possible to obtain that status. And this becomes his focus in his drive. This is his fuel. This is the inner force that moves him forward and it propels him. Henry Clay, he needs another path to walk. He knows that he's not going to get there being a bookkeeper. And he knows that he's good at sales. So what he does, he moves to Pittsburgh and he takes another department store job. And this time he's making $6 a week. And like many of his past jobs, this one is really short also. In Henry Clay right here, he kind of reminds me of a young Jim Casey who had jumped from job to job, making more money each time that he moved so that he could help his family. For Henry Clay, he's trying to help himself to move up in society and reach that goal. And when you have that fire inside, it's like a super fuel. It just moves you toward your dream. He found a position at McCarm and Carlisle, a department store in Pittsburgh, at a salary of $8 a week, plus some commission for sales. The store specialized in women's apparel and necessities. He was an aggressive salesman, challenging the pecking order on the floor. I love how we can see his drive very early on in the workplace. We can see his determination, take no bullshit and win at all cost. Frick made himself popular with the lady clientele and soon overtook Blair in sales and received an increase in salary. Still, within a few months, he again switched jobs for higher pay. This time at Cooper's, a very fashionable dealer of black tie goods, for which he received a salary of $12 a week, which was an outstanding wage for the period. His good looks and smart dress played in his favor to improve his lot as a salesman. His aggressiveness and sense of fair play in competition would augur those in his business career. Then we go even deeper here and we learn a lot more. And remember, he's only 19 or 20 at this time. His schedule was ambitious as his dreams. He rose and dressed for breakfast at 7 at the boarding house on every weekday. He had over a mile to walk across the Ninth Street Bridge to reach the store at 8. He worked at the store until 6 and then crossed the river again to have dinner at the boarding house. He then crossed back to attend night school at the Iron City Commercial College to study accounting till 9:30, finally returning home around 10. I would call that grinding it out. It reminds me a lot of a young Elon Musk when he had started his first company called Zip2. He didn't have enough money to rent an apartment. So what he did is he rented a small office space and then he just slept there. And he would go to like the YMCA to shower in the mornings. Both Frick and Musk, they grind it out. They have goals in mind and they'll do anything that it takes to get there. But for Frick, as he's cruising along, it comes to a sudden stop because he gets struck down by typhoid fever. In the summer of 1869, an overambitious and rundown Frick contracted typhoid fever. It was taken back to his grandfather's West Overton home to recover. There, his grandmother and his sister Maria nursed him. His hard work and drive had impressed his grandfather. And the silver lining here is that his grandfather had taken notice. And as he recovers at home, his grandfather starts giving him some small jobs to do at the local distillery. The goal here was to get Henry Clay into management, but he wanted to get him into the environment and make sure that the others working there became familiar with him. He didn't just want to pop him into management. He really wanted him to work his way up here. So at the age of 20, Henry became the chief bookkeeper for A. Overholt and Company. His salary was $1,000 a year, which at the time was a considerable sum. Like he had always done, Frick put all he had into the position and expanded into other areas. And as Frick starts out, he can see really big trouble in the ledger books. Abe Overholt, he was a wise businessman. He built this beautifully vertically integrated company, but he wasn't a master of finances. Henry Clay, he gets to work, starting to straighten things out. He sees a big mess here, but he's doing a good job getting it all cleaned up. But a couple of months later, after starting this job in January of 1870, unfortunately, his grandfather passes away. And Henry Clay, he kind of assumes that something's going to be left for him in the will. But the reality, he got nothing. At least in monetary terms anyways. But the concept of what is invisible is the most essential, that's going to become key here. It's the strength of what the Overholt name stood for in the eyes of the others. This is the gift that Frick gets, and he's going to use it in the near term, as we're soon going to see. His next move in life, it brings him into his own business for the first time. And there's a mixture of things going on here that all line up perfectly for Frick. The most basic element, coal, the coal that's in the ground. Because on the western side of Pennsylvania, the coal that was located by his home, which is Connellsville, it's this bituminous coal, and it's really soft, but it burns with a lot of smoke in this weak flame. And it had recently been discovered that you could take this coal and you can bake it in these beehive like ovens. And you do that for a couple of days, and this burns off all of the impurities. And what it leaves behind is just pure carbon, and that was called a coal cake. And then it just becomes truncated down to coke for short. In this coke, it'll burn super white hot. And this is really important because you see, pig iron was booming. And large capitalists like Andrew Carnegie, what they're doing is they're buying up these big blocks of pig iron. And then they heat them up and turn them into a liquid. And then they pour it into a mold to make iron parts. And in this case, Carnegie, he needs the iron for his Keystone Bridge Company. And Frick, at a young age, he notices the boom that's taking place here. Frick had seen the endless buzz in the Pittsburgh papers about the pig iron and the furnaces and the mill projects. It was also becoming common knowledge that Connellsville coal made the world's best coke, and furnaces in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Maryland, New York, New Jersey, and even Connecticut were experimenting with Connellsville coke. Frick saw a future where coal would soon be gold. The market was extremely short on coke to supply the big iron boom, and Frick wanted badly to get in on the coal project. Then we add another major piece to the puzzle. Frick becomes aware that the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad and the Pennsylvania railroads were building branch lines into his area. This allows the cokemen to get their product easily out to the world. So with all of these elements in mind, shortly after his grandfather's death, Frick, he's playing chess one night with one of his cousins. And as the evening drags on, they're talking about the coke craze and the pig iron craze and what's going on in the community. And they're just bullshitting and learning and growing together. And his cousin, Abe Tinsman, he is part owner in this 6-acre coke operation. And Frick, he's learning firsthand here. This is the best education you can possibly get. They're swapping stories of other capitalists that are doing very well in the trade. And remember that Frick, he has this dream to be a millionaire one day. And he learns that his cousin Tinsman, he's doing like $110,000 a year. And he wants to expand his business, but he's overextended due to many other businesses that he was also in at the time. The door opens for Frick. With Tinsman and a few of the other partners, they expand. They go out and purchase 20 additional acres of coal land. Frick required a loan backed by his father and mother for his share of the $10,599. The other partners were fully engaged in other operations and investments. So as part of the agreement, Frick would manage the mine while remaining the chief bookkeeper for the distillery with a salary of $1,000 a year. He would take no salary for managing the coal mines. Frick is now 1/5 owner in this operation. Since he was running the operation, they decided to use his name and they're going to call it H.C. Frick and Company. And I really admire how Frick, he jumps in deep here with both feet and he learns his business from A to Z, or as we'll soon hear, down to the ground. Frick wanted to learn to make coke, developing his expertise as his grandfather had done with whiskey distilling. Henry Clay is personally going in and out of the mines. No other owners ever did that. And he enjoys managing the men that are working for him. At the start, what they're doing is they're just taking the raw coal out of the ground and then they're shipping it, and then others would do the baking part. In the coal that they're taking out of the ground, it's really soft and it breaks down during transport, so they weren't getting paid for all the dust in the fine coal as it was breaking down during transport just what is usable. And Frick, he sees a big area of opportunity right here for his next step. Things are good and they're shipping all the coal that they can possibly produce. And we can see early at the age of 21, Frick, he is a man of action. Frick started to buy up coal lands from farmers using a skillful system of personal loans backed by his father and the Overholt name. Frick realized the economic value of what today we call goodwill. This is the real inheritance that he gets from his grandfather. His good name, one that's known as hardworking, honest, and reliable. Then you combine this with superior salesmanship, strong accounting skills, and this deep drive, and we have an unstoppable force. Next up, it's time to expand on that area of opportunity. To do this, he needs to borrow $10,000 so that he can build a battery of 50 beehive ovens. And for this, he turns to Judge Thomas Mellon. Thomas Mellon knew both Frick's grandfather Overholt and Frick's mother Elizabeth Overholt Frick. That tie at least got him in the door, but Frick and his company lacked experience for such a loan. What Frick lacked in experience, he made up for in hope and enough business sense to persuade Mellon for the loan. Mellon recognized Frick as determined, persuasive, and audacious entrepreneur after his own heart. Now we mix this in with Mellon's own experience in the coal mines and his awareness of this booming demand for pig iron. Frick, he got the loan, and what happens next is just nuts, because a few months later, Frick is back in Mellon's office asking for another $10,000. So Mellon, the wise banker that he is, he asked one of his trusted friends, who was also an engineer, to go check out Frick's operation and report back. And this report is very positive. Land's good, ovens built well, manager on the job all day, keeps books in the evening, maybe a little too enthusiastic about pictures, but not enough to hurt, knows business down to the ground. Advice: make the loan. At the age of 21, Frick knows his business down to the ground. It's that same mentality that we saw in Sam Zemurray on episode 9, and one maxim that Zemurray repeats over and over. He says, there is no problem you can't solve if you understand your business from A to Z. Sam Zemurray, he's in the fields and he's in the warehouses with his workers, collecting information firsthand. This makes him a killer in the boardroom and also in business. Frick is the exact same way. This is his unfair advantage, and it's the reason why he is going nowhere but up in business. Books like this, they're a gift for you and I. We can learn just so much in a few hours of time. Or even podcasts like this one, Deeply Driven. We can learn the most valuable, hard-hitting lessons in an hour or so. And I've always found podcasts to be a great source of information and learning. I have to listen to probably at least 20 hours a week of podcasts, all types, business, personal development, you name it. I enjoy them a lot. And I have to believe that if the podcast existed in Frick's day, he would have been an avid consumer of podcasts. Possibly he would have had his own, and we could have learned a great deal directly from Frick's words. And just one other quick observation in that last section that you and I just read, it stated that Frick, he was enthusiastic about pictures, which at this time translates to art. The report, it goes on to tell us a little bit more about Frick in his living quarters, and I think this is really key. This is part of his bigger dream. The shack is a small 2-room cabin having a portion for prints and sketches, and then the other half as an office and living space. Frick, he now has 100 coke ovens. He's got coal land and he's got transportation. Business is good and his name is starting to grow. Frick was an important Connellsville businessman, approaching the status of his grandfather. Frick, however, was far more obsessed with work and reaching his goal of making $1 million. He showed an amazing ability to work long hours in difficult environments. I picture Frick working long hours. He's coming home to this little shack. He's enjoying his pictures with a nice meal. And this was his way to unwind from a long day as he hits the reset button overnight. He didn't need much. He has this inner fire to reach that goal, and this was the mansion in his heart. He's driving towards that $1 million. Frick pours his profits into paying off debt and expanding his business. More land, more ovens, more workers. Frick is one of the first to bring in Eastern European laborers. This cheap labor gives him a major advantage because he knows that the long-term winner in the coke business is the one who could produce it for the least. And if we zoom in on the business, the work around these coke ovens, it's dirty and it's hot. And it's really hard to find locals that even want to do that work. So Frick, he becomes a master at hiring and working with immigrant labor. Now there's another side to Frick and how he runs his business. It was said that he paid a wage rate that was just high enough for the workers to know that it would be really hard to go out and find work somewhere else. Plus, he generally treats them fair. He keeps the unions out of his shop. And from Frick's eyes, as we heard on the previous episodes, unions take away his control. He does not like unions, and he doesn't want to lose any control. He wants to run his business down to the ground. He's out in the fields and he's listening to his workers and he's working alongside of them. In the early days, he has their respect. And this really pays off big time for him during the financial panic that starts to happen in 1873. This panic, in a few years' time, it's going to actually become known as the Great Depression, and that would stick until the 1930s, until another panic would replace it and be known as the Great Depression that we know today. So while others are out there holding on for their dear life, trying not to lose their homes and their businesses as the stock market crashes, Frick, he's investing heavily. He buys out his partner Tinsman, and this gives him a 40% ownership in the business. The ledger books, they whisper to him as he cuts his cost. Frick is now in a position where he's one of only a few coke producers that can make a profit at the beaten down market price that's only paying 90 cents a ton for his product. Another thing that Frick does here is that he starts a company store, and he starts paying his workers in this scrip currency versus actually paying them in US dollars. Frick was able to write his own loans by paying his workers in scrip, where it could be used at the Union Supply, the company's store. Frick sold goods at a profit and required his workers to buy at the company's store. Now, at the start, the scrip, it's really popular with the workers. Scrip from Frick and Company and scrip from the Pennsylvania Railroad was considered a stronger currency than the US dollar to many. And if we stay here for just a moment on these company stores, you see, when the economy starts to recover, H.C. Frick and Company, they keep growing and they get up to something like 17 or 18 stores. And as a capitalist, he maximizes them. He cuts deals with local suppliers and he charges higher prices than you would get if you just went to a normal type of grocery store. And this was certainly in his right to do so. But what gets him into a lot of hot water and leaves a negative mark on Frick is that he requires his workers to shop at these stores. The type of pricing was taking a major portion of the workers' pay and contributing a major part to the company's overall profit. And it was projected like up to 20% of his profits were coming from these stores. And if we keep reading here, in addition, resentment built over the requirement to buy at the company's store. In 1882, a coal miner told an investigator, "If we do not deal in the company's store, we are not wanted at the mine and are given a poor place to work." To me, it seems like Frick misses out on an opportunity with opening the first Costco. Why not set these company stores up like a membership club and then pass those deep discounts on to your workers? We saw on episode 12 how Saul Price had developed into a low margin retailer and he turned inventory faster than Carnegie could make steel. But in all seriousness here, he really could have at least passed those savings along to his workers as a benefit. Now, if we hop back into the timeline here, we're around the year 1874, 1875. What he does is he continues to buy up depressed coal lands and he's investing in new technology so that he can mine deeper into the earth. In Frick's deep drive to build his company, it's second to none. Frick's typical workday is that he got up at 6, looked over the ovens and set things going, took the train to Pittsburgh at 7, reached his office at 10, legged it from factory to factory soliciting orders till 3, reached his home about 7, and attended to the details of mining till bedtime. 4 words: down to the ground. Frick does it all. In this next section of the book, I wrote Walmart of Coke. This is just what popped in my mind as I was reading this. And just listen to this. In 1875, a competing company, Morgan Mines, that had failed. Frick, he goes out and he assumes the $60,000 deed on the business, plus he puts in another $10,000 of his own money and he scoops up the mine that just 1 year previous was worth as much as $650,000. Now, what Frick does here is he combines his operations and the Morgan Mines operations, and he runs just the best ovens. Along with this, he builds a bridge across the river and he lays railroad tracks so that he can now charge the railroads for access to picking up his coke. That's brilliant. In December of 1876, Frick was the volume and low-cost producer of Connellsville Coke. That was the line that made me think of Walmart. Personally, he had little debt and a cash reserve, while the other Coke princes in the area went bankrupt. Now, while all of this is going on, Carnegie, he's building out his Edgar Thomson works that are going to come online in September of 1875. Carnegie and Frick, they're about the only two capitalists that actually grow and expand during this downturn. This was a big leg up for both of these founders. On the last 2 episodes, we spoke quite a bit about how Carnegie had got started into steel, but as just a quick recap, at this new plant that he was developing, the Edgar Thomson, Carnegie, he had installed these new Bessemer converters. This new type of oven, it allows Carnegie to take this raw pig iron and he can heat it up into a liquid format, and then he can blow like compressed air through the iron, and this burns off the impurities, and then the end result is steel. And what I'll say here is that the book, it does an excellent job at breaking down the technical details of how this process happens and how it evolves over time and all the backstories that come into play here. There's a lot of them, and it does a really good job. And the point that I wanted to call out here, and this is the main thing, is that for Carnegie, this Bessemer process makes him a leader in the steel industry because he can now produce tons and tons of it in like 15 or 20 minutes, whereas before that would take days and days to get that amount of steel produced. The only thing that gets the pig iron hot enough to make the steel is coke. And where is the best coke in the world found? In Connellsville. However, what Carnegie does, he's a man of vertical integration as well. He starts making his own coke, but he really struggles and he can't keep up with his demand. So he slowly starts bringing in coke from the outside. Now, meanwhile, for Frick, as he moves into the second half of the 1870s, things start to change for him. The company's growth, it really finds him in Pittsburgh most of the time, where his customers were and where the banks were located. So Frick, he goes out and he hires a gentleman by the name of Thomas Lynch to be his superintendent of day-to-day operations. And Lynch, he's really the perfect fit. Lynch was a man made in Frick's own image and had learned the business from the ground up with Frick. Again, right here, Sol Price just pops into my mind. He had this concept of developing your alter ego. The owner must teach his employees to become his alter ego so that when they understand the importance of their jobs and perform their jobs as well or better than he, the owner, would if he had the time. As a corollary, the owner of the store needs to use his time to do the highest skilled work and to delegate the less skilled work to his alter egos. In that way, the owner will devote his time to managing the business and making sure that his alter egos are doing their job and doing them well. On that Saul Price episode, I had also mentioned how Mr. Beast or Jimmy Donaldson, who 60 or 70 years after Saul Price, and this would be like 150 years after Frick, he takes a similar approach. And Jimmy says that his goal is to train his most trusted employees to think like him. And in doing so, he says that he has little mini clones of himself. Now, he does say that, this takes many years for this to happen. And I can imagine that that is the case. But now that he's been putting his focus and efforts into this, he has several copies that he can trust. Thus, what he's doing is he's multiplying his decision making power, and he's doing that quite dramatically. If we go back to the book here, Frick, he sees this. He knows the power of it early on in life. Frick had learned the secret that Carnegie had found years earlier, that a good manager could multiply his efforts many times. And what an impact just a few key people in our businesses can have. I just think about Elon Musk. I know this is a lot of examples here on this, but he interviewed the first 3,000 employees when he founded SpaceX. And he says that he had to put the time into it to get the employees that he wanted that had that deep inner drive and fire. I think it's just so important. Okay, let's hop back into the story here. For Frick, he's producing coke. He's doing it cheap. The economy starts to recover. The coke price, it goes from 90 cents to $2 to $3 and then $4 a ton. So we combine this with Frick's strict cost control structure that he has in place, and he finally reaches his dream of being a millionaire by the age of 30. Everything changes. Frick recreates his life after he becomes a millionaire. He was still deeply involved in the business, but he starts focusing more on the finances and leaning in to be more of a strategic executive. And as we move forward here, what I'll do is I'll look at these bigger items in Frick's life, the ones that have a lot of heavy value for us. And I always find it really fascinating how founders discover their drive and they follow their passions and they do what they love. They build, they struggle, they overcome, and they build more. And at some point, they just make it. Frick has made it. Technically, he's financially set for life. But if he would have stopped now and done nothing, well, I think this book would have never been written, and that would have been a tragedy. He presses on. For Frick, he does start enjoying more of a social life. He meets a young Andrew Mellon, and Andrew Mellon was the son of banker Thomas Mellon, and they just develop this lifelong friendship, and they start taking trips together to Europe to collect art. And it's from Andrew that he really learns more about finances and investing. And Frick really teaches us the value of having these strong relationships. And this goes further. Frick helps form what was called the Duquest Club, and this is in Pittsburgh. And this was a club where the members would come in daily, and most of these guys were big founders in the area of the Pig Iron Association, and they would get together and they would swap stories and they would talk about what was going on in their factories. As part of the club, just deal after deal goes down, and they also work together to fix prices. And this was legal at the time. Outside of Pittsburgh, Frick spends a lot of time in New York with his friend Andrew Mellon. One day, they take a little trip down Fifth Avenue to take a look at all the big, massive mansions. They hired a carriage to take them up Fifth Avenue to view the mansions of the old guard capitalists. It appears Clay was in search of a new goal to fuel his ambition. They stopped to view the new mansion of William H. Vanderbilt, the son of Commodore Vanderbilt, who was the principal owner of the New York Central Railroad. The mansion had an extensive art gallery connected to it that fascinated Frick. Many sources record the following speculation by Frick. What do you suppose the upkeep of that place would be? Would you say $300,000 a year? About $1,000 a day? There is no question that Frick drew new inspiration from his visit to the Vanderbilt mansion. I think it's safe to say that Fricky has a new driving force right here. But before the fancy houses, he meets his wife Ada in 1881, and they marry after 3 short months of a courtship in December. Mellon would be his best man. Now, this entire time that he was courting his wife, Frick, he's working real closely with Tom Carnegie. And Tom was trying to broker a deal in which he could buy more Coke from Frick. And he wanted Frick to come and meet Andrew Carnegie to help close this deal that he had been working on. So the day after he's married, he goes and meets Andrew Carnegie for the first time in New York. After many hours, these two baby titans, as I call them at this time, they work out a deal. Andrew Carnegie is going to buy 4,500 shares of the H.C. Frick Coke Company. Frick, he's going to be the exclusive supplier to Carnegie's steel mills. And then Frick is also going to take over all of Andrew Carnegie's Coke ovens. This increases his total oven capacity from 1,000 to, I believe it was around 2,200, it says. Now, there's a few important points to keep in mind here. As Frick was growing his business, he was aggressive about this, and he had made a partnership deal with the Ferguson brothers, perhaps maybe a year or so before. And when he did that, he had changed the name from H.C. Frick Company to H.C. Frick Coke Company because he had recapitalized the company. And when he does that, the Ferguson brothers, they now own 2/3 of his company. Frick, he's still the face and he's the man in charge. And the Ferguson brothers, they generally went along with Frick's decision. And I'm telling you this because it's going to become a knife that Carnegie is going to use to stab Frick in the back here real soon. But at the start of the deal in 1882, it really looked like Frick was a strategic master, like he had outplayed Carnegie. But we're going to see that change because over the next 2 years, Carnegie, he starts buying stock from the Ferguson brothers. And by 1885, Carnegie is now the majority shareholder of Frick's company. Frick had really been blinded by the rapid growth of his company, this deal with Andrew Carnegie, all the cash that's flowing in. He's just dumping it into the company, and that makes him the largest Coke producer in the world. But what he didn't do is he didn't watch his basket of eggs as closely as Carnegie did. And that just makes me stop for a second and think, do you have all your stuff locked up? Are you watching your basket? Stories like this, they just feed directly into my actions and they make me really look for holes where I can be better each day. I really do believe that small actions that we take every single day, they stack up over time and they just make us better in the long run. Now, for Frick and Carnegie, when they started this partnership, it was good. The low cost of the Coke allows Carnegie to slash his prices on the steel. He does that and he scoops up the market aggressively, especially when it came to rails for the rapidly expanding railroad network all across the United States. Frick can't keep up with the orders. The first major cracks in the Frick and Carnegie partnership, they start to show up around the mid 80s. You see, at this time, Frick had set up a Coke syndicate with other producers, and this was primarily to set the price floor at $1.50 a ton for their product. While this is highly illegal today, it was perfectly legal then. Carnegie, who's now the controlling shareholder of H.C. Frick Coke Company, he sends one of his representatives out to this syndicate meeting who asks Frick directly in front of all of his peers. He says, "What is the price for Carnegie?" Frick responds and he says, "It's the same, $1.50 a ton." Something important to know at this point here. Carnegie, he views Coke as simply a resource. Frick, he wants to get into steel and he had offered to sell even more shares in his company so that he could become a small owner in Carnegie's business, to which he had been coldly denied by Carnegie. So if we go back to the meeting here, the response from the Carnegie representative was, "No, Mr. Carnegie will pay no more than $1.15 per ton, and that is final." Frick, he knows he's dead in the water on this topic. Compound that with what we just learned. He's lost control of his company and he resigns his position in the Coke syndicate and he's embarrassed. His company is going to honor that Carnegie price. He doesn't have a choice, he doesn't have any control, but he's not out. Frick started a personal quest to understand steel making. Frick might have been flanked, but he was far from out of the fight. Carnegie also needed Frick's knowledge in running H.C. Frick. Frick had also gained respect of Carnegie's largest and oldest partner, Henry Phipps. More and more, Phipps turned to Frick for financial advice and his investments. If we jump forward a little bit here to October of 1886, Tom Carnegie is going to die from pneumonia. And this is a major blow for Carnegie because you see, he was letting Tom run the day-to-day operations of his plants. And at the same time, this is also a major blow for Frick. It seems like he had a better personal relationship and working relationship with Tom. So Carnegie, he knows he needs help. He turns back to Frick and he offers him $100,000 of stock, which I believe makes him right around a 2% owner in Carnegie Steel. Frick is finally in steel. Frick proved up to the task as he started a crash course on steelmaking through a reading campaign. Frick's knowledge would soon overtake his master. I love this approach. Dive in headfirst and learn everything you can. We can learn right here from the greats. Outside of work, Frick and his best friend Andrew Mellon, they continue to invest in small coalfield companies, and he also invests in natural gas with his friend George Westinghouse. He buys up massive tracts of land all around the area along with real estate, and this makes him the largest landowner in Pittsburgh. When people look at Frick today, they tend to link him with Andrew Carnegie. While they were bonded in steelmaking, Frick, he was well diversified outside of this. He continues to run H.C. Frick Coke Company, and he starts working his way into the steel mills. In one of his first actions here is that Frick, he makes a change to the working structure, and he increases the use of the management foreman, and they would supervise and set goals in the plant. This was a newer concept and one that he had been using in his mine sites with quite a bit of success. As new technology starts to replace the skilled worker, the foreman is brought in to direct all of the non skilled workers. Previously, this task was conducted by the skilled worker. He would direct his crew as part of his job function. But what Frick finds out here is that he can hire one foreman that would replace several skilled workers. And then the pay of that one foreman is lower than just one of those workers. So he's really getting a one for many right here. And as a result, productivity in the shop, it goes up. But like all new things, this was not popular at all, especially with the unions, for which Frick has absolutely no tolerance for unions. He resists them at all costs, which we heard a great deal about on the last episode. There's a lot of labor relations coverage in this book. Strikes, they're frequent as the union, they try to take control in the plants and the factories. Bloody wars are fought in those factories and out on the streets. Frick and Carnegie, they both have different views on how to handle strikes, and this opens a Grand Canyon-sized feud between them. The first of which is a coal strike that takes place at H.C. Frick Coke Company in 1887. You see, the workers, they're demanding a 20% pay increase. They can see very clearly that the company is making massive profits. It's reported in the newspapers. They can see it. Frick, he meets them in the middle, 10% raise. But Carnegie, he really fears that a strike is going to lead to a coke shortage. No coke, no steel. He doesn't like that. He basically wants Frick to relent. Carnegie sent an ultimatum to Frick to end the strike and restore wages. More importantly for Frick's ego, he was reduced to a Carnegie puppet. Frick, the king of coke, had been struck down by the Prince of Steel. Frick relented and offered his resignation. He's really powerless as a minority shareholder in his own company that he founded. He gave up control. This is the second time that Carnegie has dropped the iron hammer on Frick. Frick, he's not out. About a year later, he does return again as president of the H.C. Frick Coke Company. And then a year after that, he's going to be named the president of Carnegie Brothers. And his ownership in the company would increase to around 11%. That was quite substantial for him. And he's going to be given the responsibility to oversee the largest steelmaker on planet Earth. Frick's two main areas of focus: cost control and vertical integration. He studies every detail down to the ground. One thing that he notices is that their second biggest cost after the raw materials was for freight rates of moving materials between their various plants. Carnegie had expanded his Pittsburgh plants with almost total disregard for the transportation cost. The building of the company's own railroad proved highly cost effective, and building costs were repaid in months. It was called, I think this is a little ironic, the Union Railroad. And this gives Frick a lot of power against those larger railroad companies because they knew he was serious and that he would build his own tracks out to the coal fields in those remote areas. So they slashed their prices to keep his business. Carnegie starts to trust Frick a little bit more. He knows that he's a pure business genius, even above his own abilities. Frick feels this increased sense of responsibility, and he starts putting pressure on Carnegie to take his two companies and then combine them into one. And this takes time, but Frick keeps putting the pressure on. Another strategy that Frick introduces here is the study. Carnegie, he makes decisions with his gut, with very little info, and he was often wrong. Frick, he wanted the details up front so that he can make solid decisions. He was operating as an executive. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't going by his gut. He wanted the details. And these studies, I think about them as blueprints. There's a lot of them that are described in the book, such as like a blueprint for building a new plant along this river or making a plant by the Great Lakes. There was a blueprint for building new railroad tracks, a blueprint for plant expansions. And one of the first ones that he had developed was focusing on labor. And Frick, he uses this as a lever to open Carnegie's eyes. Martin found, and William Martin, he was the man that Frick had hired to conduct this study, that homestead rollers were paid 50% higher than 10 other competing mills. Even more damning was the finding that the union work rules required more workers than needed. Carnegie cabled Frick in June. It is not only the wages paid, but the number of men required by union rules, which makes our labor rates so much higher. Carnegie was now determined that the unions had to go. For Frick and his view of the unions, it was 100% about control. With the union in place, he loses control down to the ground. And Frick, more than anything, he wants control. As we reach the middle of 1892, Carnegie, at Frick's suggestion, along with a detailed study of the benefits, he goes along with Frick's plan and he combines his two companies into one singular Carnegie Steel Company. If we advance forward just a few days here on the calendar, it's July 3rd. The workers at Homestead, they go out on strike. And a few key facts right here. Only about 800 of the 3,800 are union. And for months leading up to the strike, there's this buzz in the air about the union contract being up. Papers all over the country, they're predicting a war. To a degree, it had the buildup of an early Super Bowl and was one of the first national events shaped by press coverage. Homestead later became something of a folklore and a mythology. Frick and Carnegie, they agree on one thing. They both want the union out, but they have different views on how to approach this. Carnegie, he simply wants to just shut down the plant, starve the men out. That's what he's done in the past, and it worked okay. Frick, he doesn't want to shut shit down. He wants to keep going. Carnegie, he runs off to Europe. He's hiding out, and he leaves Frick to do the dirty work. And so for Frick, months previous, what he had done is he had constructed this fence all around the mill. This is like a 9 to 12 foot high fence with barbed wire running around the top. And they call it Fort Frick in the newspapers. And I really see this as kindling for the media. This large company, they're out there in the open preparing for war. I mean, imagine in modern times, well, I guess a lot of modern plants have fences around them anyways, but just imagine if they tripled that fence and had this 30-foot high fence that you couldn't see behind. What do you think would be going on in there? That would be kind of odd. That's what's happening right here. A few days after the strike starts, Frick goes out. He hires 300 Pinkerton guards. And their task was to help secure the property as replacement workers. They're going to be brought in. In Frick's eyes, as soon as the men went out on strike, the union was dead. He just needs workers to come in and get the mill restarted. Now, as those Pinkerton guards approach the plant, they're coming down river on their barges, and a war breaks out. Workers fire upon the barges, and the guards fire back. This goes back and forth for something like 12 hours. In the end, 3 guards are killed, and 7 workers lose their lives. The Pinkerton men, they surrender, and as they're exiting the barges, They're beaten badly by the workers. Not long after this, I think it was like a week or so, the state of Pennsylvania finally brings in like 8,000 militia to help protect the property and all of the men that are working inside. Now, for Frick, if you recall earlier in the episode, we had read a couple selections about Frick's daily routine as a young employee and as a student, and then later on as he was growing H.C. Frick Coke Company. Here in midlife and during the strike, Frick, he's still a man of routine. Someone is following him. Berkman's first visit allowed him to learn about Frick's well-known routine, scope the office, and see that there were no bodyguards. And who was Berkman? He's an anarchist, and he has a crazed plan. A day or so later, he comes for a second visit. He's waiting outside of the office building. He doesn't have an appointment, and he waits. He waits until a telegraph messenger boy goes to the door, and Berkman grabs the door before it can close, and he slips inside. He makes his way to Frick's office. Frick, he's in a meeting with his second in command, whose name is Leisman. As he hears the door open, he turns around and looks. Berkman rushed in and fired a shot, hitting Frick in the shoulder. Frick fell and Berkman fired again, hitting him in the neck. He took aim for a third shot, but Leisman intervened, forcing the shot to go wild and hitting the ceiling. Leishman wrestled Berkman to the ground. Frick jumped in and Berkman took out a sharpened file dagger and stuck Frick in the leg and the knee. The office boy got the sheriff's deputy, who took aim, but Frick called him off, only wanting to see the attacker's face. In the struggle with the deputy, Berkman was found to have an explosive pill in his mouth, but it failed to go off. That is intense. And that account differs a little bit from the one that we covered on the last episode. All I can say is history is messy. Eyewitnesses, they see and experience different things, and that gets translated and it takes different paths. As all of this is happening, Frick, he says that he saw his daughter Martha at his side. And sadly, Martha had died about a year previous. She was only 6 years old when this takes place. They had been in England many years before, and she had swallowed a pin. And it doesn't say what type of pin. My brain just sees like maybe a little push pin or something like that. And this is just really sad because Martha slowly develops an infection, and this makes her sicker and sicker over a 4-year period of time. They didn't have x-ray machines back then, and this really takes a deep toll on Frick as he's watching his daughter just get sicker and sicker as time passes by. The impact on Frick could be seen throughout his entire life. Martha was buried in Homewood Cemetery about a tenth of a mile from Clayton. And Clayton was the name of Frick's home. And Frick had the trees cleared so that he could see the grave from Clayton's second floor. Frick would commission sculptors and painters to recreate Martha in art. Outside of work, Henry Clay Frick, he was a family man. He loves his wife and he loves his children very deeply, and he spends a lot of time with them at home, and they take a lot of trips together. He put a lot of focus on his family, just as much focus on his family as he did his business. Martha's death was devastating. He uses work as an escape. Right here, as he's bleeding out on his office floor. Berkman, he's about to fire the third shot at his head. Frick would always contend that it was the spiritual light of Martha that blinded Berkman, who had reported that sunlight from the window caused him to miss the headshot. And that gives me chills each time I read it. Martha was there watching over her father. Shortly after, doctors arrive. They want to take Frick to the hospital, but he refuses to leave and he's treated on site. He refuses anesthesia, even helps, my goodness, he even helps the doctors probe for bullets. I can't even imagine being shot and then probing your own body to help get the bullets out. That's nuts. That's just nuts. Then, amazingly, he seemed revived. He wrote short telegrams to his wife, Carnegie, and then the press. In this assassination attempt, it really changes the public's view of the strike, and for the first time, they become more in favor of Frick and Carnegie. And many of the non-union men, they don't see the point in the strike anymore. It doesn't really benefit them. They're ready to return to work. Frick's foremen in the plant, they start to rehire workers on a non-union basis. Remember, the union's dead, at least in Frick's eyes. And by November of 1892, he's up and moving around again very well, and the union, they end their strike. Frick doubles down again against the union, saying that they were no longer recognized. End of story. In the end, this Homestead strike, it leaves a deep black mark in history against Henry Clay Frick. Many biographers in the media, they paint him as the Antichrist of labor. Family biographers on the other side, they focus more on his love of art and his family, trying to paint him in a positive light. This book, as Quentin says up front, his goal was to look at Frick fairly, taking all of the historical events into consideration to give us a balanced and fair view of Frick. And I think the author has done an amazing job at accomplishing this feat. And as we move forward here, I just wanted to pull out some major items from Frick's life that you and I can talk about and we can learn from them. Now, one of the ironic parts of this whole story is the fact that Frick generally paid his workers better wages than they could find elsewhere. I think we heard a little bit of that earlier. Frick's workers were making, on average, better wages. Frick took pride in better operations and was considered worker-friendly. Frick often used Hungarians, African Americans, and Italians, where others would not, and he allowed them to stay in the workforce. And in addition, he often promoted them into foremen. Then building on this foundation, Frick, he's shaping the future architecture of U.S. steel. Hidden in history, it would be one of Frick's greatest business moves. In fact, it was a deal that Carnegie saw no profitability in. It was the expansion into iron ore mining. What Frick does is he pores over study after study. He's not going by his gut, he's trusting the data. And so they dive into iron ore production. At the start in 1892, they only extract about 30,000 tons. 2 years later, listen to this, 1.9 million tons they're bringing out of the ground. No longer are they buying iron ore, they're digging it out of the ground themselves with the massive claims that Frick had secured. In fact, they need more iron ore than what they can mine. Frick had gained the respect and the trust of John D. Rockefeller, and he works out a deal to buy all of his iron ore mining capacity. And this pushes them from 2 million tons to 10 million tons of iron ore that they're digging up and producing into steel. From the book here, Rockefeller had great respect for Frick, but little for Carnegie. And if we just think about that for a moment, the richest man in the world right here gives Frick respect. Why? I think it's really simple. He's a man of action, and he backs up his words with action. Carnegie, he's the opposite. He has a lot of words. He's always well spoken, but he doesn't always match those words with actions. The key here, I think, is that actions ring loud and profits stack. Years later, Carnegie, he swallows his pride and he admits that he was wrong on this. Next, Frick, he sets up a production team whose only job is making sure that the big customers that they're servicing get exactly what they ordered on time, every time. nobody else was doing this. This vertically integrated cash machine catches the eye of JP Morgan. Before we get to that, though, Frick and Carnegie, they fall out for one last and final time. As we had covered in great detail on the last episode, what I'll do is I'll just recap it here so you have a general feel. When Carnegie's brother Tom had died, he put together what was called the Ironclad Agreement. This allows other partners to buy shares in the event that one partner should die. And it also said that a partner could be kicked out if something like 2/3 of the other partners had agreed. So on January 8th, 1899, Carnegie walks into Frick's office and says that he's invoking the ironclad. And this is going to give Frick around $1.5 million for his 6% ownership in the company. Needless to say, Frick, he's pissed. He yells at Carnegie, saying the following: "For years, I've been convinced that there is not an honest bone in your body. Now I know you are a goddamn thief." Then over the next 2 days here, Carnegie is going to pressure the board to have Frick removed as chairman and president. But Frick, he doesn't delay. He goes right out and he hires the same lawyer who wrote the ironclad, and they basically just poke holes in the agreement. Fearing that they would have to go to trial and that Carnegie would have to take off his Mr. Honest and Clean mask and open his books up so that the public could see all of his finances, and what they would see here is that he was making as much as $40 million a year in some years, he decides to settle with Frick. And what he's going to do is he's going to take Carnegie's steel, valued at $250 million, and H.C. Frick Coke Company, valued at $70 million. He's going to combine those together. The end result here is that Frick comes away with almost $31 million in stock, which he holds on to. And about a year later, Carnegie works out a deal to sell to JP Morgan for $480 million. Frick's stock turns into $70 million. Not long after that, the stock price goes up. He now has $88 million in the new U.S. Steel. Now, Frick, he is really a wise financial genius, and he can see very clearly that the company is overcapitalized, and he starts selling off his stock. For the next 20 years, Frick serves on the U.S. Steel Financial Committee. And this may not sound like a very big deal, but the way the company was set up, it says that the president of the company couldn't make any major decisions without the approval of the financial committee. On a strategic level, no one understood the steel industry better than Henry Clay Frick. While not a technology expert, Frick had an aggregate view that others lacked. Furthermore, few had the investment and finance experience of Frick. If we go forward to 1905, Frick, he moves to New York, and he achieves his second life's goal by leasing that Vanderbilt mansion he had seen 25 years ago. He secures a 10-year term lease. A single millionaire in 1880, 25 years later, he's worth over $70 million. Frick, he continues to be involved in U.S. Steel special committees, and this gives him a lot of freedom. He's not tied down day to day. With that freedom, he goes out, he collects art, and he dives deeper into his philanthropy and his family life. During his lifetime, he's going to give away more than $60 million. And for me, it just goes back to the early influence of those McGuffey readers that he was immersed in growing up as a kid. Just to hammer it home here from the book. The McGuffey reader began to reinforce individual property rights, the need to give to the poor, the importance of saving, Christian principles, and appreciation for the classics, and American exceptionalism. That is 100% pure Frick right there. I think that's where we'll leave the story for today. I'm going to come back to Frick in future episodes. There's more here, a lot more. For the next episode, I'm already thinking about solely focusing on how he shaped American business as an executive. And as some quick examples, keeping communications confidential, organizational decision making, adapting new technologies, efficient process flows, and deal makings. I really do hope that you can pick up a copy of this book. It's well researched and it's written in a clear manner that's easy to follow along with. If you enjoyed the episode and you found some value, possibly you would consider following the show or even leaving some feedback. I would greatly appreciate it. The show is 100% ad free, and for this one episode alone, I've spent probably 35, 40, maybe more hours reading, outlining, recording, and editing the episode. And I really do enjoy reading and sharing with you. Working on the podcast is the best part of my day. Until next time, make it a beautiful day in the neighborhood, my friend.